A family wakes up and begins their hectic morning routine before Danny heads out to start his daily route. He rides his bike from his lower-income housing to the country club where he gets ready to be Ty's caddy. Danny tries to get some life advice from Ty, but they definitely come from two separate parts of the world. Ty tries to show him what he means by saying things will work out how they're supposed to, and he manages to hit a ball within inches of the hole while blindfolded. When it comes time for Danny to try, it ends up in the water. Meanwhile, the Gopher is back, and Judge Smales notices that it's tearing up the course. He's told that the Gopher is here because of the construction next door. His assistant goes to Carl, instructing him to take out every gopher he sees. At the caddy shack, Carl tries telling a tall tale to one of the caddies, and he goes from being a gopher catcher to the caddy for the Dalai Lama. Out on the course, Tony helps his next old couple, and they're proving to be a difficult bunch. When he gets back to the caddy shack, he gets into a fight with Danny. That's when Lou, the manager, notices the fight and warns everyone that they need to get their act together. Then, he tells everyone that the caddy scholarship is back on the line, and Danny thinks that this is his chance. Elsewhere, Judge Smales gets his employees in line, and he tries to get Ty to play golf with him. Ty doesn't seem to have any interest in doing so. Just then, Al shows up to play golf, and everyone at the country club knows that he's arrived. When the caddies gather for their assignments, Danny volunteers to caddy for Judge Smales. But everyone gets distracted by Smales' niece, Lacey. When Smales goes up to play, Al arrives, and he tries to put a rush on their game. The two of them don't seem to be playing well on the same course, but that's not stopping Al from following right behind him. On top of that, Danny keeps trying to brown-nose Judge Smales, but it doesn't seem to be working. Elsewhere, Carl is trying to flush out the Gopher, but the Gopher seems to be 2 steps ahead of him. Eventually, Danny and Smales' group make it to a food stand, and Danny sneaks around back with Maggie to grab a free bite and a sweet kiss. She tries to convince him to come out that night to help her work, but he's not sure if he'll be able to. Back on the course, Al really starts grinding Smales' gears, and he even tosses a club into a woman while she's eating. Danny stands up and takes the blame for the event, and Smales thanks Danny before telling him about winning the caddies tournament for the scholarship. That night, Carl is dead set on beating this Gopher, and he gets locked and loaded in order to take it down. Elsewhere, Smales takes the family to a banquet, and Al is there entertaining some guests as well. Ty decides to show up for the banquet too, and the guests are absolutely delighted to meet him. Ty ends up taking some time to talk with Lacey, and the two of them seem to be a good match. In fact, the two of them are the perfect match, and they're getting ready for a good night. That is, until Carl's bullet ricochets and takes out a nearby lamp. The next day, Carl goes to dig more holes, but he's extremely distracted by the woman golfers. Across the course, Danny talks with Ty about winning the caddy tournament for the scholarship, and Ty tries to convince him that college isn't everything. When it comes time for the caddy tournament, Danny still decides that this is what he wants to try and do. In the end, Danny wins the tournament, and Smales invites him to a few events. Later that day, everyone heads to the pool to celebrate, and Lacey manages to turn heads within a matter of seconds. Tony decides to shoot his shot, but it looks like he won't be getting anywhere fast either. By the pool, someone fights over a candy bar, and it ends up flying into the water. When it gets closer to the crowd, they think that it's actually feces, and the entire pool is emptied and disinfected by Carl. Later, Lacey heads over to Ty's place, and she winds up calling him pathetic while he makes her a drink. It doesn't take long before Ty's drunkenly playing the organ while they continue to take shots of tequila. In no time at all, they go skinny dipping in the pool, and he gives her a very sensual massage. The next day, kids are smoking the reefer at an event with Smales, and Danny shows up to try and make a good impression for the scholarship. He gets ready to meet Smales at his new boat, but Lacey pulls him aside to read his fate in his palm. Meanwhile, Al notices Smales getting ready to christen the boat, and he decides to swing by to point out that his boat is bigger. He ends up taking out a lot of the other boaters in his venture to show off, but Al couldn't care less in the end. In fact, he ends his boat ride of terror by dropping his anchor into Smales' boat. Danny, on the other hand, is getting lucky with Lacey. but he doesn't know that someone else is coming home. The two of them lay in bed for a moment, but just as they get up to mess around again, Smales and his wife show up. Smales walks in on them, and he grabs his club to terrorize Danny. Luckily for Danny, he's a bad shot, and he makes it out of the house in one piece. Back at the club, Carl tees off on the local landscaping, but then he picks up as a caddy for a guest that wants to get in 9 holes before the rain. Somehow, this guy is one of the best golfers, and he keeps playing through the storm. This guy ends up playing the best hole of his life, but it also ends up being the last hole of his life as he's struck by lightning. In the morning, Maggie pops up at the caddy shack to find Danny sleeping there. He tells her that he's in big trouble, and Maggie drops the bomb that she's actually pregnant. Danny thinks that this is the end of the line then, and he tells her that they have to get married now. She warns him that he might not be the father, but he still thinks that he wants to get married. After Maggie storms off, a messenger shows up to tell him that Smales wants to see him. When he sits down with him, Smales tells him that he already knew about Lacey's tastes, but he thinks that they're still good in Danny. He offers Danny the scholarship to keep things in order, and Danny graciously accepts. That evening, everyone gathers at the country club, and Smales ends up getting into it with Al. Out on the course, Maggie dances around in a nightgown, and she tells Danny that she's actually not pregnant. She thanks him for his kind words earlier, and Danny starts to wonder if he's really as good as she thinks. Inside, Al tries to set up a bet with Smales, but he wants to team with Ty, who isn't too happy about jumping into the bet. Smales tries to convince him to play on his team, but Ty agrees to be on Al's team if they raise the bet to $40,000 for 18 holes. Later, Carl sits in his room and thinks that he has to start looking and thinking like an animal if he's going to catch this gopher. Just then, Ty hits a golf ball into his room, and he ends up having a nice heart-to-heart with him. He even ends up smoking a giant doobie with him, and he opens up about the stress that he's been feeling with everything going on lately. In the morning, Al and Ty ride right up to the golf course, and Smales is absolutely furious. As Ty goes to get out of the car, he ends up slamming his finger in the car door, and things aren't looking too good now. They end up raising the stakes to $100,000, and after news gets out about the match, everyone else at the country club decides to get in on the action. Carl starts setting up explosives for the gopher, and it even pops up and steals Al's ball while he waits. Eventually, Al mentions that this is the worst game of his life, but Ty tries to convince him that everything will be okay. Things don't seem too promising as they continue, but after a mishap, Al says that his arm is broken. The rules state that they can substitute a player, and they decide to have Danny step in. Smales tells him that this means he won't get the scholarship, but Danny knows what he's doing. On the last hole, Ty tries to motivate Danny to win, and it ends up working. Meanwhile, Carl is going gopher crazy. By the last hole, the game is all tied up. But things don't look so good when Ty misses his shot. It's only after Al calls double or nothing on Danny's final shot that things start to really get serious. Danny initially misses the shot by a mere inch, but luckily, Carl blows dynamite in the gopher's hole, and it shakes the course so hard that the ball rolls right in. The golf course was destroyed, but Danny pulled off an $80,000 winning hole. Al goes to collect the debt, but Smales isn't too cooperative. Al has his guys take care of Smales, and the gopher shows that a little dynamite won't be enough to take him out. Caddyshack is a classic comedy, and the all-star comedy cast only solidifies its place in comedy history. And that wraps up this recap.